In the spring of 1644, one man stood between two worlds and made a choice that would define the next 3 centuries of Chinese history. On one side, a rebel army that had just toppled his emperor and occupied the capital. On the other, a foreign power he had spent his entire military career fighting warriors from the frozen northeast, who called themselves the Qing, the Pure. For decades they had hammered at China's northern walls. And there was exactly one thing standing between them and the heart of the empire. One fortress, one pass, one gate. His name was Wu Sangui. He was the man who held that gate. And on a single morning in May 1644, he opened it. What happened next didn't just end a dynasty. It handed China to a foreign ruling house for 268 years, longer than the United States has existed as a nation. And it all came down to one general, one decision, and a gate that should never have been unlocked. To understand the magnitude of what Wu Sangui did, you have to understand what the world looked like in 1644, because China was unraveling from two directions at once. The Ming Dynasty had ruled China for 276 years. Founded in 1368 by a man born a peasant, literally a shepherd boy who rose to become the son of heaven, the Ming had built the Forbidden City, commissioned Zheng He's legendary voyages across the Indian Ocean, and at their height governed the most populous empire on earth. But by the 1640s, the Ming were finished. Not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding collapse that had been decades in the making. A series of catastrophic droughts across northern China had destroyed harvests for years in a row. Famine spread across entire provinces. The imperial treasury was hemorrhaging money, fighting wars on two fronts. Soldiers went unpaid for months, sometimes years. Tax collectors squeezed a starving population. Corruption rotted the bureaucracy from the inside. The Chongzhen Emperor, the 16th and last Ming ruler, was reportedly a hard-working man who genuinely tried to save his dynasty, but he was governing a system that had already collapsed. He executed and replaced military commanders so frequently that no general trusted the court and no court trusted the generals. Into that vacuum of authority, two threats arose simultaneously, and this is the key to understanding everything that followed. From the north, beyond the Great Wall, the Manchu people had been building something extraordinary. Under the Aisin-Jioro clan, they had forged a disciplined, centralized state that blended Manchu military power with Chinese administrative methods. They called their dynasty the Qing the Pure. For decades, they had raided deep into Ming territory, humiliated Ming armies in open battle, and carved out control of Manchuria and much of the northeast. But one obstacle kept blocking their path into the Chinese heartland: the Shanhai Pass, a fortified mountain gap where the Great Wall meets the Bohai Sea, the most strategically critical choke point in all of East Asia. And the man entrusted with holding that pass was Wu Sangui. But while the Manchu threat came from outside, an even more immediate danger was igniting from within. His name was Li Zicheng, and his story is almost stranger than fiction. He had started his adult life as a postal courier, a low-ranking government employee who lost his job when the cash-strapped Ming court cut the postal service to save money. Unemployed, humiliated, and hungry, Li Zicheng joined a rebel band. And over the following years, he built that band into something terrifying, a mass movement of the dispossessed, the desperate, and the furious. By the early months of 1644, Li Zicheng commanded an army estimated at several 100,000 men. His forces rolled westward through northern China like a wave. City after city fell, and Ming officials surrendered without a fight. Then on April 24th, 1644, the unthinkable happened. Li Zicheng's army broke through the gates of Beijing. The Chongzhen Emperor, in the final hours before the city fell, walked alone to a small hill behind the forbidden city called Coal Hill. He dismissed his eunuch attendants. He wrote a few last words on the lapel of his robe. I, feeble and of small virtue, have offended against heaven. The rebels have seized my capital because my ministers deceived me. Ashamed to face my ancestors, I die. Removing my imperial cap, and with my hair disheveled, I leave to the rebels the dismemberment of my body. Let them not harm a single one of my people. He then hanged himself from a tree. 276 years of the Ming Dynasty ended with a single body swinging from an old gnarled tree on a hill in Beijing. The question that hung in the smoke-filled air was now terrifyingly simple. Who comes next? Wu Sangui was born in 1612 into a military family in northern China. His father, Wu Xiang, was a Ming general. The son followed the same path, trained in horsemanship and combat, from childhood rising through the military ranks with a combination of genuine talent and family connections. By his late 20s, he had been appointed as the supreme military commander of Liaodong, one of the most dangerous posts in the empire, a frontline position facing the Manchu forces directly across the northeastern border. Those who served under Wu Sangui described a man who was formidable in the field, courageous, decisive, capable of inspiring loyalty in his troops and inspiring terror in his enemies. He had on at least one documented occasion personally ridden into enemy cavalry to rescue soldiers who were surrounded. He was the kind of commander men would follow without question, which made him both indispensable to any ruler and extraordinarily dangerous as an enemy. He was also, by all accounts, intensely practical. He was not an idealist. He was not a man who let abstract principle cloud his judgment in a crisis. He watched, calculated, and acted, and this quality more than anything else would define what he did next. In April 1644, as news reached him that Li Zicheng was marching on Beijing, Wu Sangui received an urgent imperial order: abandon the Shanhai Pass and bring his army west to defend the capital. It was an enormous ask. Leaving the pass undefended meant removing the single most important barrier between the Manchu forces and the Chinese heartland. But an emperor's order was an emperor's order. Wu Sangui took roughly 40,000 to 50,000 of his best troops and began marching west. He never made it. Somewhere on the road west, messengers arrived in rapid succession, each one carrying worse news than the last. Beijing had fallen. The emperor was dead, hanged on a hill behind his own palace. Li Zicheng controlled the capital, and Wu Sangui's entire extended family, including his father, Wu Xiang, a general in his own right, was now trapped inside Beijing in the hands of the rebel army that had just overthrown everything they had served. Wu Sangui stopped, and this is the moment history has been arguing about ever since. He had three options. Each one led to a completely different future for him and for China, and the clock was ticking because doing nothing was itself a decision. Option 1, fight. March his 40,000 troops directly at Li Zicheng's army, an army many times larger, fresh from conquering the capital and riding a tide of momentum, and try to take Beijing back by force. Even if somehow he won, there was no Ming emperor left to restore. The dynasty was gone. This option was, in any realistic calculation, suicide. Option 2, surrender to Li Zicheng. The rebel leader had already sent multiple envoys to Wu Sangui offering generous terms. Wu Sangui could keep his military command, his rank, his status. Li Zicheng's government needed experienced generals, and Wu was among the best in China. This was the pragmatic option, the safe option. And for a brief moment, Wu Sangui appeared to lean toward it. Negotiations had reportedly begun. Then word arrived from Beijing, and everything changed. But what broke the negotiations, what tipped Wu Sangui over the edge, is a story that has haunted Chinese literature and historical memory for centuries. And it involves a woman who had absolutely no say in any of it. This is the part where history and legend become almost impossible to separate, and where the story of Wu Sangui takes on a dimension that has fascinated people for centuries. Chen Yuan was, by all accounts, a woman of extraordinary beauty and talent, a celebrated singer and performer from Suzhou, one of China's most refined cities. She had become Wu Sangui's beloved concubine, living in his household in Beijing while he commanded the frontier. When Li Zicheng's army stormed the capital and his generals began seizing the property and women of Ming officials, one of Li's top commanders, a man named Liu Zongmin, took Chen Yuan for himself. When Wu Sangui learned this, the negotiations with Li Zicheng's envoys ended. According to tradition, he flew into a fury. The poet Wu Weiye, writing a few decades later, immortalized the moment in a famous line that has echoed through Chinese culture ever since. The enraged general drew his sword for the sake of a beautiful woman. Whether that was the true turning point or a poetic simplification of a far more complicated calculation is a question historians still debate today, because here is what the romantic legend tends to leave out. Wu Sangui's father was also being held in Beijing as a hostage, subjected to pressure and likely torture by Li Zicheng's men. Li Zicheng had a documented history of executing Ming officials and extracting their wealth by force. Even if Wu Sangui submitted, there was no guarantee that Li could successfully govern an empire of 100 million people. The rebel leader had never administered anything larger than an army. And Wu Sangui had spent years watching the Manchu forces across the northeastern border. He knew their leader, the regent Dorgan, was a brilliant commander and an organized statesman. The Qing had something Li Zicheng did not, a functional government. Whatever his true motivations, heartbreak calculation, or a combination of both, Wu Sangui made his choice. He sat down and wrote a letter to Dorgan, the Manchu regent. The message was audacious. He asked the Manchu forces to march through the Shanhai Pass, help him destroy Li Zicheng's rebel army, and avenge the death of the Ming Emperor. In exchange, Wu Sangui would serve the Qing. Dorgan read the letter and did not hesitate for a single moment. This was the opportunity the Manchu had been waiting for, not just for years, but for decades. He mobilized his forces immediately. May 27, 1644, dawn over the Shanhai Pass. The night before, Wu Sangui's troops and the Manchu cavalry had positioned themselves carefully. Wu's men in front of the pass, the Manchu cavalry concealed on the flanks, waiting. It was a classic hammer and anvil formation, and it required both sides to trust each other completely. That trust was built on the thinnest possible foundation, mutual self-interest, and a letter sent 2 weeks earlier. On the western side of the pass, Li Zicheng had brought his main army estimates range from 100,000 to 130,000 men, veterans of the campaigns that had swept through northern China and taken Beijing. Li Zicheng was there in person, and he had brought one final card to play. Wu Sangui's elderly father was led out in chains before the rebel army. Li Zicheng believed the sight of his prisoner would shatter his opponent's resolve and force a surrender. Wu Sangui looked at his father across the battlefield. Then he turned away. The gates of the Shanhai Pass swung open. What came through was unlike anything the rebel army had ever faced. Tens of thousands of Manchu cavalrymen, armored, disciplined riding war horses bred for battle, poured through the pass and crashed into the flanks of Li Zicheng's force with devastating speed. These were arguably the finest heavy cavalry in Asia at that moment in history. They had trained for this kind of warfare for generations, and they were striking from a direction the rebel army had never expected. The battle did not last long. Li Zicheng's army, which had swept through province after province without serious resistance, collapsed under the combined assault of Wu Sangui's troops from the front and the Manchu cavalry hammering their flanks. It was one of the most decisive single engagements in Chinese history, and it was over in less than a day. Li Zicheng fled back toward Beijing. Before retreating in a final act of vengeance, he had Wu Sangui's father executed. Wu Sangui had known this was the likely price of his decision. He had paid it anyway. Li Zicheng spent just enough time in Beijing to hold a rushed, humiliating coronation ceremony, declaring himself emperor of a dynasty that lasted less than a month before fleeing west. The following year, he was killed in circumstances that history records with almost tragicomic obscurity. Some accounts say he was beaten to death by villagers while foraging alone for food, reduced from self-proclaimed emperor of China to a fugitive scrounging for a meal. The Manchu, meanwhile, rode into Beijing not as pillaging conquerors, but as liberators, or at least they were careful to present themselves that way. Dorgan, acting in the name of the young Shunji emperor, announced that the Qing had come to avenge the murdered Ming emperor, restore order, and bring peace to the Chinese people. A new dynasty had begun. And the man who brokered its arrival, who unlocked the door, was Wu Sangui. The Qing rewarded Wu Sangui handsomely. He was given the title Prince Who Pacifies the West, and granted near-total autonomous rule over Yunnan and Guizhou provinces in southwestern China, a vast territory rich in resources and strategically critical. He levied his own taxes, maintained his own army, and issued his own orders. He controlled the silver mines of Yunnan, the trade routes into Southeast Asia, and the military forces of the entire Southwest. He was in every meaningful sense a king who happened to owe nominal allegiance to an emperor 1,000 miles away. But Wu Sangui did not simply step aside and let the Qing consolidate their power on their own. For the next 2 decades, he was the tip of the Qing spear in their southern campaigns. He led armies that hunted down the remnants of Ming loyalist resistance across southern China, men who were fighting in the name of the dynasty he had helped destroy. He pursued the last legitimate Ming claimant, the Yongli Emperor, all the way into Burma, pressuring the Burmese king until the fugitive emperor was handed over. And in 1662, Wu Sangui personally ordered the Yongli Emperor's execution, strangled with a bowstring. This is the act that history finds hardest to excuse. Opening the past to the Manchu historians can argue that context, that circumstance, that practical necessity drove him there. But personally, hunting down and killing the last ruler of the dynasty, he had served a man of the same people, the last thread of Ming legitimacy, erased every possible defense. As for Chen Yuan, the woman at the center of the legend, she was eventually reunited with Wu Sangui. But history does not record what she felt about any of it. She left no writings, no documented words. She was a shadow in someone else's story. In her final years, according to tradition, she became a Buddhist nun, retreating into silence and renunciation, leaving behind the world that had used her as a footnote for one of the greatest upheavals in Chinese history. Back in Beijing, the Qing Dynasty was growing stronger by the year. The Kangxi Emperor, came to the throne in 1661 at just 8 years old. But as he matured into independent rule in his late teens, he revealed himself to be one of the most formidable rulers in Chinese history. Intellectually curious, politically ruthless, and possessed of a strategic patience that his enemies consistently underestimated. And Kangxi looked south with growing concern. Wu Sangui was not the only semi-autonomous warlord the Qing had created in exchange for help with the conquest. There were 3 such power centers known collectively as the 3 feudatories Wu Sangui in Yunnan Guizhou, Gengjingzhong in Fujian, and Shang Kexi's son in Guangdong. Together, these 3 feudal lords consumed an estimated quarter of the imperial treasury every year. More troublingly, they showed every sign of intending to make their power permanent and hereditary mini-kingdoms within the Qing Empire. In 1673, Kangxi, just 19 years old, made a decision that his senior advisors thought was dangerously reckless. He ordered the dissolution of all 3 feudatories and the reintegration of their territories under direct imperial control. His advisors warned him this would trigger rebellion. Kangxi issued the order anyway. They were right. Wu Sangui, 61 years old but still formidable, made his last great choice. He rose in rebellion against the Qing, the very empire he had spent 30 years building through blood and betrayal. He raised the banner of "Resist the Qing, restore the Ming." He cut his hair short again and dressed in the clothing of the old dynasty. He sent envoys to every disaffected Han Chinese general and official he could find, appealing to ethnic resentment, to nostalgia for the old order, to the indignity of Manchu rule. Did he actually believe in the Ming cause? Or was he simply using it as a rallying cry to protect his own power? The answer, most historians agree, was the latter. But many Han Chinese wanted to believe the humiliation of foreign rule, the forced adoption of Manchu hairstyle, and dress the memory of the world before 1644. These were real grievances, and Wu Sangui knew exactly how to exploit them. The rebellion spread with stunning speed. Within 2 years, most of southern China had slipped beyond Qing control. It was the most serious threat the Qing Dynasty had faced since conquering China. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like Wu Sangui might actually pull it off. But he made a fatal strategic error. When he could have pressed north across the Yangtze River and driven straight toward Beijing while the Qing were still reeling, he stopped. He consolidated his position in the south instead. Historians have debated why ever since. Some say he was too old and too cautious. Others argue he never intended a full conquest, that he was playing for a negotiated settlement that would let him keep his autonomous power. Whatever the reason, the pause gave Kangxi exactly the breathing room he needed. The young emperor mobilized his resources, brought in fresh commanders, and began the long process of rolling back the rebellion piece by piece. Gengjingzhong surrendered in 1676. Shang Kexi's surrendered in 1677. Wu Sangui stood increasingly alone, a 65-year-old general watching his coalition collapse around him, betrayed in turn by the same logic of self-preservation that had guided his own decisions 3 decades earlier. In the spring of 1678, he did something that stripped away the last pretense. He declared himself emperor of a new dynasty, the Great Zhou, named for his own family. Not a restoration of the Ming, his own dynasty, his own name on the throne. The mask was finally off. He had never been fighting for the Chinese people. He had been fighting for Wu Sangui. He did not live to see what happened next. In August 1678, just months after his coronation, Wu Sangui died reportedly from dysentery his body finally giving out after a lifetime of campaigning. He was 66 years old. The empire he had spent his life building, first for the Ming, then for the Qing, and finally for himself, dissolved with him. His grandson, Wu Shifan, held out for 3 more years. In 1681, the last fortress of the great Zhou Kunming, the capital of Yunnan, fell to Qing forces. Wu Shifan took his own life. The revolt of the 3 feudatories, which had lasted 8 years and caused millions of deaths across southern China, was over. The Qing Dynasty, under the Chongzhen Emperor, now ruled a unified China more completely than ever before. More than 300 years after Wu Sangui's death, his name still carries weight in China, but not the weight of a hero. In Chinese historical memory, Wu Sangui became the archetypal traitor, the man who, for personal gain or personal grievance, handed his country to a foreign power. His name is used in Chinese culture the way Judas or Benedict Arnold is used in the West. In some parts of China, people still speak of him with a contempt that has not softened with the centuries. What makes his legacy particularly sharp is not just what he did in 1644, it is the totality of his choices across an entire lifetime. He betrayed the Ming. He served the Qing. He betrayed the Qing. He claimed to restore the Ming, but crowned himself in a different dynasty's name. At every crucial turn, he chose himself. But the real history is, as always, more complicated than the legend. Consider the counterfactual. What if Wu Sangui had not opened the gate? If he had surrendered to Li Zicheng, instead, would a former postal courier with no administrative experience have successfully governed 100 million people? Li Zicheng's record in the territories he controlled, marked by chaos, extortion, and failure to restore order, suggests the answer is probably no. China might well have fractured into years or decades of brutal civil war, with casualties and suffering potentially dwarfing what happened under the Qing conquest. There is also the uncomfortable question of what the Manchu conquest actually meant for China in the long run. The initial decades were genuinely brutal. The Qing imposed the queue, the distinctive Manchu hairstyle, on the Han Chinese population by decree, and those who refused faced execution. Hundreds of thousands died in massacres as Qing forces secured their hold on the south. The cultural shock of foreign rule was real and deep. And yet the Qing Dynasty, for all the cultural trauma of its arrival, was not the catastrophic disaster that nationalist narratives sometimes imply. The Kangxi Yongzheng and Qianlong emperors presided over a period of enormous territorial expansion and relative stability. The Qing preserved and codified much of Chinese culture, literature, and administrative tradition. Perhaps most significantly for the modern world, it was the Qing who incorporated Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia into the Chinese imperial sphere territories that the People's Republic of China claims as part of its sovereign territory today. In a very real sense, the borders of modern China are a Qing inheritance. The historian Frederick Wakeman described the events of 1644 as one of the great pivot points of East Asian history, not simply because the Ming fell, but because of how it fell not through a frontal military conquest, but through a door opened from the inside. That is what Chinese culture has never forgiven Wu Sangui for. Not that he lost, but that he chose the winning side before the game was over. Not that he was defeated, but that he was too calculating, too cold, too willing to sacrifice everything, including his own father, including the emperor he served, including the people he was supposed to protect for the sake of survival and power. Today, in Yunnan province, the southwestern corner of China that Wu Sangui once ruled like a king, you can still find traces of his era. A few old structures, local legends, stories of the man who once sat at the crossroads of two worlds and chose the road no one expected. His former palace in Kunming is gone demolished by time and the deliberate erasure of a dynasty that wanted to be forgotten. But the mountains he governed are still there, and the trade routes he controlled still carry goods across the border into Southeast Asia. The geography that made him powerful outlasted the man. Chen Yuanyuan, the woman whose story became permanently attached to his reportedly spent her final years as a Buddhist nun in silence and seclusion. Whether she carried grief or relief, or simply the exhaustion of having been written into history without her consent, no one recorded. History remembered her name. It did not bother to record her voice. And Wu Sangui himself, the man at the center of it all, remains one of Chinese history's most permanently ambiguous figures. Was he a traitor? A realist? A man trapped by circumstances beyond any individual's control? A calculating opportunist who chose power over loyalty at every turn? The historical record supports all of these readings simultaneously, which is perhaps why the debate has never ended. Here is what history tells us with certainty. A single man on a single morning in May 1644 made a choice. He opened a gate that had been holding back a dynasty, and the world that came through that gate was not the world he had planned for it, never is. He died in defeat, his dynasty stillborn, his legacy defined by betrayal. Empires can be built with 1,000,000 swords, but sometimes all it takes to bring one down is a single person willing to open the door. The decision Wu Sangui made in 1644 didn't just appear on maps or in political records. It shaped what it meant to be Chinese, the weight of loyalty, the cost of betrayal, and the impossible question of what one person owes to a nation that may already be beyond saving. That question has no clean answer. It never did. And 3.5 centuries later, it still doesn't. History rarely offers the luxury of good choices, only the choices people actually make, and the consequences they leave behind for everyone else to live with. If you found this story worth thinking about, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another forgotten chapter of history. The stories that textbooks skip, the decisions that shaped the world we live in, and the human beings who made them under impossible pressure. And leave a comment below. Do you think Wu Sangui was a traitor, or simply a man who understood better than anyone else that the Ming Dynasty was already dead? I want to know where you stand.